Hello, my name is Professor Anna Nikaris, and I'm the director of the Little Fireface Project. And this is a video in a series where I am presenting scientific papers that we have written about lorises, nocturnal animals, and our Little Fireface Project in Indonesia. And this paper is a novel application of cultural consensus models to evaluate conservation education programs. This paper was published in 2018 in the journal Conservation Biology as a conservation methods article, and I co-authored it with Sharon McCabe, Denise Spahn, Mohammed Ali Imran, and Vincent Nyman. As for each of these videos, I will read the full abstract, and then I will go into the rest of the paper as it would have been presented at a conference. Conservation professionals recognize the need to evaluate education initiatives with a flexible approach that is culturally appropriate. Cultural consensus theory, or CCT, provides a framework for measuring the extent to which beliefs are communally held and has long been applied by social scientists. In a conservation education context, we applied CCT and used free lists of items on a topic stated in order of cultural importance, and domain analysis of how free lists go together within a cultural group, to evaluate a conservation education program in which we used a children's book to increase knowledge about and empathy for a critically endangered mammal, the Javan slow loris, Nycticebus javanicus. We extracted free lists of keywords generated by students, 580 of them in 18 schools, from essays they wrote before and after the education program. In 2 classroom sessions conducted approximately 18 weeks apart, we asked students to write an essay about their knowledge of the target species, and then presented a book and several activities about slow loris ecology. Prior to the second session, we asked students to write a second essay. We generated free lists from both essays, quantified salience of terms used, and conducted minimum residuals factor analysis to determine presence of cultural domains surrounding slow lorises in each session. Students increased their use of words accurately associated with slow loris ecology and conservation from 43% in initial essays to 76% in final essays. Domain coherence increased from 22% to 47% across schools, and 15 factors contributed to the domain slow loris. Between the first and second essays, factors that showed the greatest change were feeding ecology and slow loris as a forest protector, which increased 7-fold, and the human-centric factor, which decreased 5-fold. As demonstrated by knowledge retention and creation of unique stories and conservation opinions, children achieved all 6 levels of Bloom's taxonomy of learning domains. Free from the constraints of questionnaires and surveys, CCT methods provide a promising avenue to evaluate conservation education programs. So what does all that mean? I will tell you that in the next few slides. But first, I just want to mention why conservation education is really important in terms of primate conservation or animal conservation. When we look at primates, 60% of species are threatened with extinction, and 75% of species have declining populations, possibly even more because many are really data deficient, particularly a lot of the nocturnal primates. And if we know about flora and fauna, we can engage in behaviors that can help us to protect those animals. And there's a lot of suggestion that we must support children's biological tendency to bond with the world and the animals in it, rather than filling them with fear and trying, to make them feel sad about things that are going on in the world. Meaningful learning experiences through place-based education, where you actually can bring children out into the forest and they see wildlife, can help them to learn, appreciate, understand, and love their native wildlife, because we know that a lot of children actually are more familiar with things like Pokemon characters than they are about their own native species. There's a place for children's books in conservation education, be it primates or other animals. In English, the first book we really have that taught about moral treatment and kindness towards animals was Sarah Trimmer's 1796 Fabulous Histories, which was designed for the instruction of children and largely featured a family of robins. This led to other stories that we know well, like Black Beauty in the 19th century, And finally, in the early 20th century, we really entered what we call the golden age of children's literature with stories like Peter Rabbit and The Winds in the Willows. Despite these traditions of sweet animals and having little adventures, when conservationists write children's books, not coming from a children's writing background, they may create ecophobic books. This comes from limited time, funding. They might want to give a whole message at once. And ecophobia is really the concept of making you don't want to think about ecology. You don't want to think about preserving animals. And the children's theorist David Sobel and children's educator wrote, environmental problems are seemingly so widespread and beyond students' control that their tendency is to turn away from problem solving. If we prematurely ask children to deal with problems of an adult world, we cut them off from their possible sources of strength. And I will show you some examples of these kind of children's books in conservation literature. But I want to speak first about a mentor of mine who actually went against this movement. This is Alison Jolly, and she was a champion of research in Madagascar working on ringtail lemurs. And she realized, first of all, that ecophobia was a problem when she did find some conservation books about lemurs in Madagascar written by conservation groups. They often showed forests being cut or burned down, animals being hunted, animals being kept as pets. And with charming children's books, most of them came from Western publishers or French publishers and were frequently about, say, the big five in Africa. So zebras or giraffes or elephants, and not about lemurs or animals that occurred in Madagascar that could help children grow and have empathy and love those animals. At the concrete operational stage, where children are younger than 12 years old, it's suggested they cannot really predict outcomes. So teaching too abstractly too early and making them try to make decisions about these really great environmental problems could be dangerous. And so Alison said, why not give children charming books about lovely lemurs? And I actually used Alison's book with my master's in primate conservation students here in the UK at Oxford Brookes University, and I wanted their perceptions of Alice's perception that her books were ecophilic, with many other books that are published in primatology. I actually found 30 books made by primate conservationists for their conservation projects. I asked 66 master students to estimate the age that they thought the book was for and how ecophobic it was, being the least ecophobic on a scale of 1 all the way to 5. It's very ecophobic, so it's got a lot of negative information that could cause children to turn off. So no book that we looked at actually included a recommended age. Normally, if you go to a commercial bookstore, books will recommend the age for their readers, for children. But our students seem to think most of these books were for 7 to 8 year olds. This was often because of the font or the drawings, but some of them had a huge amount of text, which we wouldn't typically see with a 7 to 8 year old. 9 of 30 books, including all of Alison's books, which were 6 of them, scored high on an ecophilia scale. Terms for these books were, they described them as sweet. The children could learn about the primate, shows ways a child could help but not be scary. Or it was very descriptive, could make a child fall in love with an animal, has tension but a happy ending. So if any of you listening to this have actually read children's books to your children or your nieces, nephews, friends' children before, or you were read to as a child, or you think of what your favorite children's book was, it tends to be a sweet, a funny book. It doesn't tend to be a book about real world problems and death. If we go to the next slide, we see that 16 of 30 books created by primatologists for their own projects were ranked as having very high levels of ecophobic content. Here you see crying, you see a cage, you see skulls, a gun, the forest cut down. And terms used to describe these books were depressing, hopeless, despair, happy ending but still depressing, sense of helplessness. Kids would have to tell their parents they are wrong. This story would give me nightmares. So having considered and looked at these books, we wanted to evaluate in our project if messages could be delivered with an ecophilic approach. if we could use a children's book with actual ecological messages, but making it very friendly through a more friendly story. And to do this, we worked in Indonesia. So we have been studying slow lorises, Javan slow lorises in Java Island since 2011. We've developed a community conservation project surrounding the critically endangered Javan slow loris you see here in the picture. We are studying those animals with radio tracking, and then we also do community outreach projects. Slow lorises are prevalent in myth and culture. They're kept as pets, but really most people locally don't know about their behavior and ecology, and before we did our study, very little was known worldwide. We hope to develop a children's education program to increase empathy and knowledge for the Javan slow loris. We created a unique picture book called Slow Loris Forest Protector. This was written by myself and illustrated by a Singapore artist, Shelley Lowe, who was really familiar with animals of Southeast Asia and had a charming drawing style that really suited our area. You'll note that the slow lorises aren't actually a specific species because we did want to be able to use this book in other areas, because in Indonesia, for example, there are 7 loris species. We also wanted to make sure the biology was incredibly accurate down to the fingernails and the tooth comb. Lorises are venomous, and in the illegal wildlife trade, their tooth comb is often cut. By having the tooth comb featured in many of the pictures as if the loris was smiling, this could really influence children just to perceive a loris has teeth. So we hoped when they were older, they wouldn't even have the thought of cutting teeth crossing their mind. The life history was important because they're quite social and they learn from their mother. And they're learning to find food, which includes flowers they pollinate, insects that are pests, and gum, which is an unusual food for any animal to eat and often is not even fed in zoos or rescue centers. So getting that into children's minds, it's one of the reasons they don't make a good pets. And the whole approach was ecophilic. We did not say anything about threats to lorises in the book. We also had an activity pack for the children that had many different types of games. They could make masks, they could do plays, they could create their own songs. The teacher's pack was different. It included information to empower them to know much more than the students. A lot of the ecological details of lorises, their closest relatives, the threats to slow lorises were in that teacher's pack. So it could have been possible that students would go to their teacher and ask them, what do I do if I find a slow loris? And the teacher would have known had she read the teacher's pack. We also created live mascots of the 2 main characters, which are really important and popular in Indonesia. And children took their book home, and also a game, which was a set of memory cards that introduced new animals and reinforced key terms in the book. So these were matching cards. For example, we had certain plants that were in the book, but new plants were in the pack. We had owls in the book, but we introduced Javan hawk eagles in the pack. We had leopard cats in the book. We introduced civets in the pack. So more and more animals could become known through that way. We presented data in our conservation biology paper from 2013 to 2015. It was a 2-year period. We had 2 sessions. We went twice to each school, about 18 weeks apart, spent 2 hours there. We went to 18 schools and reached over 1,200 children, 580 of whom did both essays in a way that could be analyzed, half girls, half boys with an age of 9 to 10. And we asked before the session to write an essay. Tell us what is a slow loris. Tell us what you know about a slow loris. The method that we used for these data involved cultural consensus theory. This is used in cognitive anthropology. It is an emic approach, interpreting a culture from within, considering local attitudes, perceptions, behaviors, rules, and worldviews. So we would ask a single question on a single topic that should have the similar level of difficulty and really could arguably have one set of possible answers. What is a slow loris? It's not a bird. It's not a plane. It's a primate. So we are really looking for kind of potentially correct answers about a slow loris. Free listing is a tool that is really helpful to look at these domains. And not only do we look at the frequency of outputs, but we want to look at the order in which they're presented. And also we look between groups, how much they agree upon words, in this case, what is a slow loris. This method is often used, for example, understanding what people use as traditional medicines. It might be used in understanding their concept of religion or myth. So in our case, we were just looking at what they thought about slow lorises. It's very useful because it could be written, it could be just lists, and it could be verbal. So it could be an essay or it could be lists. So it's a really useful way to gather data. The level of agreement when our audience actually agrees on a concept is called cultural competence, and it gains a domain coherence score from a process called minimum residual factor analysis. This minimum residual factor analysis comes from a program we use called UCINet. There are R packages that do the same, and it comes also, you have to insert your list from your different audiences and groups into that program. And we used NVivo to clean our lists, to find synonyms, to remove filler words. NVivo also can be used to convert your free list data into salience, Smith's salience. So this just tells you the words that are said most frequently earliest on. After you do the domain analysis, your words are essentially put into different factors that you then have to determine what that group of words logically means together. And then we can look at the score they receive, which is their cultural competence score. And in our case, because we had matched pairs, we used a Wilcoxon test to see if our groups differed. So what are some of the results? Students wrote 8,403 words. And when we look at the first and the second essay, we found in the first essay, 2,990 were not filler words, 322 were unique. For the second essay, 3,514 words, so they wrote longer essays, were not fillers, but 207 were unique. Why does that number go down? Well, in the first essay, 43% of words actually occurred in the book, whereas in the second essay, 76% of the words occurred. So they started writing more similar essays about the book. 197 words occurred only in the first list and were largely irrelevant, whereas 80 words appeared only in the final list, and they were largely about conservation or loris biology. So essentially, the words children were using in these essays became much more conservation orientated and loris orientated. We could see this in some of the examples in salience, where the pink on my left is the first essay, and the dark red is the second essay. And we had important words like venom increase in the second essay, as well as two of the important food trees of the loris, Kaliandra and Acacia, that is gum and nectar. When we look at cultural competence, we look at a ratio between the value that is given for the first and second factors, then the second and third factors, etc. And in our first essay, only 22% of schools showed any domain coherence. This means that we were able to get any factors out of those schools, and a lot of those were human-centric. They were writing strange essays. I'll give you an example. In the second essay, 47% were coherent, with 3 more approaching coherent. And you can see the number of factors that were identified. I highlight 2 schools that have 4 factors identified. This means that words that they used fitted into a particular category, like ecology or forest protector or loris biology or agriculture. So those were all themes in the book. We also identified other factors like negative conservation, where they said, I don't like it, I want to just sit. They were being silly sometimes. They didn't know what the animal was, and a lot of the boys especially, I would hit it, I would kill it, or something like that. And negative feelings, it's ugly, those sort of things disappeared. Human-centric, maybe describing the loris as a human, or talking about other animals like penguins and dinosaurs, because they didn't know what it was, all decreased from the first to the second essay. Our ecophilic approach also worked. Here you can see some very sweet quotes that were written in the second essay. The mother shows the baby which food in the forest is good for it, which is really cute. Slow loris eats insects that are harmful to farmers' crops. We must never take it from the nature. My name is Slow Loris, and I am native to the forest. Because I must protect the forest, I will bite people who try to eat me. If the Slow Loris lives in the forest, it will be really happy. If you bring Slow Loris to the house, it'll be sad. This means we cannot bring Slow Loris into our house to meet our father and mother. It's really sad if we cut down the trees, because it's really sad for the loris. And then finally, slow lorises are the protectors of the forest. They love to eat the nectar of caliandra flowers and gum from jenjang trees. Slow lorises are protected because they are special and have venom. If you catch one, you will go to jail for 5 years. When we relate these figures to Bloom's taxonomy, we can see that children created unique stories using ideas related to slow loris ecology. They actually brought in ideas about legal system that were not taught in the class. And of course, they remembered and understood basic concepts. So what we want in our conservation education programs is to get beyond awareness, just remembering or even understanding. If we could get them to change their behavior, go out and explore, that's a really positive thing. So when we look at what was achieved, 99.3% achieved remembering by learning words from the book. 76% listed relevant words that were learned from other materials but not in the book, suggesting they talk to their parents or their teacher about lorises. And here's a great example from one boy whose first and second essay changed dramatically. Slow loris is a type of person that is pretty and cute. It is also diligent. It also could speak English really well. It wears pearls, it wears high heels that are good and well colored. The second essay, slow loris belongs in the wilds. It has fur that is beautiful. It has a stripe down its back. It eats nectar from caliandra and gum from jenjang. You couldn't have two essays that were more different from each other. This shows also the success of our cultural domain analysis. There are several aspects about our work. Story data were suitable. We didn't have to give questionnaires. Questionnaires in our area can be really negative because they're perceived as a test. They're perceived to have a right and wrong answer. And we didn't have a right and wrong answer. We wanted to know what children really knew about slow lorises and how they felt about slow lorises. So they were able to write down their thoughts and feelings. We could also measure the knowledge learned from the book in the program because it was very, very clear. It wasn't just a recall by looking at a questionnaire. Children really knew what the gum trees and the nectar trees and the names of the characters were. What's great about this method, it can work in less literate societies because it can also be done verbally. And also you don't have those constraints of questionnaires. You just have the constraints of having perhaps the language translated for you and making sure you pick the right meaning of the words that are translated. Also, it can help us to inform further education programs. We might have had a concept that wasn't picked up as much as others, or that we didn't realize would be picked up, and we want to explore it more. So here are some other examples of success of the program. Students learned key facts about the slow loris. It was venomous, pollinator, insect pest consumer, a social primate, it's endemic. Even without mention of it during class, students felt slow loris was happier in the forest and should be protected. The great increase in knowledge across schools highly suggests that students did engage with the book. They probably read it again, and they likely brought it home with their parents. So what are some ways forward in creating conservation picture books? We feel that children's books should emphasize kinship with nature, and there's a whole literature about this. David Sobel, very famous in that, but some other examples are given there. And here are examples of some very popular books that are sweet and lovely and don't need to show negative ecophobic aspects, showing illegal trade, deforestation, fires, hunting, tears, blood, grim facts could lead to isolation and hopelessness. Conservation practitioners should take lessons from best-selling children's books and use books as a tool to first educate children about a target species and gain empathy for it. And things like the education program and additional materials could be added, but you want them to hold that book, to treasure it, read it again and again. And many of my students have said the single scene in Bambi where the mother is killed has made them feel sad to watch Bambi ever again. So a whole book full of that sort of thing is not what we want to give to children. And these are some last thoughts from my mentor, Alison Jolly, who sadly passed away a few years ago. And I'm so happy that I got to work with her and develop children's books with her, and that she was able to read Slow Loris Forest Protector. She said, "I'm so pleased that you think the eco books are an inspiration, and it's surprising how children's books get one so much more excited than journal articles. Such fun." If you do want to read our book, it is available on our website, www.nocturama.org, and it's also available for purchase from our Etsy shop, Little Fireface Project. Finally, David Sobel said, "What is important is that children have an opportunity to bond with the natural world, to learn to love it before being asked to heal its wounds. We are faced with a biodiversity crisis. We need to get more and more people around the world to really love animals, to recognize the species that live around them, to know their names and identify them before they disappear. And children's books are just one of the first pathways that is able to do that." So thank you very much for listening. You can see our website there where we have a lot of our education materials. And you also can please follow our Facebook, Instagram, etc. And do subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this that will be demonstrating papers we have written in this format. So thank you so much for listening.